The Russian military is likely quite embarrassed by how effective the Western artillery and the U.S. HIMARS rocket artillery system have been in Ukraine. HIMARS has a range of about 50 miles, and that's enough to attack logistical supply lines in the rear area and also important command posts. So the HIMARS effectiveness, destroying so much of Russia's military logistics, is so embarrassing that it looks like the Russian military is trying to find a justification for how Ukraine could be so effective using this weapon. And so they're saying the U.S. Is involved.
Jeremy Corbyn, first of all, in his remarks today, he is, of course, the former Labour leader, and that's worth noting, I suppose, as we start this conversation. But I wonder if there's anything in what he had to say about more use of language around peace and perhaps looking for who that negotiator for peace could be, if not the UN. What do you make of that, first of all?
Well, there's no sign thus far that Russia is interested in negotiating. Top Russian leaders have talked about wiping Ukraine off the map. That's not the kind of language that one would expect from a country that would be interested in negotiating a just peace. Mr. Corbyn talked about lots of Ukrainians being killed, but there seems to be overwhelming support in Ukraine for continuing the fight against Russia and restoring the territorial integrity of the country.
Yeah, interesting thoughts, actually, on that. Let's turn then to what Russia said today about America's involvement in the war. I mean, is it not really quite obvious already that the US is really quite heavily involved in the war in terms of supplying arms and humanitarian support, etc.? I'm trying to work out what Russia's getting at.
The Russian military is likely quite embarrassed by how effective the Western artillery and the U.S. HIMARS rocket artillery system have been in Ukraine. HIMARS has a range of about 50 miles, and that's enough to attack logistical supply lines in the rear area and also important command posts. So the HIMARS effectiveness, destroying so much of Russia's military logistics, is so embarrassing that it looks like the Russian military is trying to find a justification for how Ukraine could be so effective using this weapon. And so they're saying the U.S. Is involved. It's a way of escaping responsibility for Russian military, if you will, vulnerability.
Is it a justification for potential escalation as well from Russia?
So Russia has not shown any sign of de-escalation thus far. Russia has tried to use every tool in its arsenal, including, for example, it used much or maybe most of its precision-guided munitions, its most effective weaponry, and it is now attacking civilian targets in cities across Ukraine, in addition to the front line. That suggests a certain measure of desperation on the Russians' part. It suggests that the Russians believe they can scare the Ukrainians, but that's not what's happening. The Ukrainians have become emboldened by that.
Does that sort of approach from Russia, does that give anything away as to what stage we're at in this war and the length, the duration of it?
It does not. It would be imprudent to predict the course of the war or how it will end at this point. As we have seen already, at the beginning, the Ukrainians had major success in forcing the Russians back from Kiev, Kharkiv, the two largest cities in Ukraine, and in preventing Russian forces from getting to Odessa, the third largest city in Ukraine. So those are major strategic setbacks for the Russians. But then in the eastern Ukraine, the Russians have made some gains, although they are not particularly important for determining the outcome of the war. But in the south, now Ukrainians have begun launching counteroffensives in the Kherson region, and that's strategically important because the Russians occupy land on both sides of the Dnipro River, Ukraine's largest river. And so for Ukraine to get back access to that river is particularly important.